Prime Minister Mark Carney is in India with hopes to bolster trade between the two countries and mend what has been a tense relationship. The CBC's Catherine Cullen is traveling with the Prime Minister. She's in Mumbai with more.
The Prime Minister has come to India looking to rewrite the relationship with a big emphasis on investment and trade. Saskatchewan's Premier has traveled with him, hopeful Canada is making up for lost time with India.
And I would say from a trade perspective that we've fallen behind a number of other countries around the world.
This is a big reset.
India is keen too. The High Commissioner says his country wants a lot of what Canada is selling, particularly energy, from nuclear to oil and gas.
Energy, there is appetite to which even Canada cannot fulfill. And we're willing to buy whatever Canada is offering on crude, on LPG, on LNG.
A far cry from recent years, from Justin Trudeau's awkward visit to 2023 allegations Indian agents were involved in the murder of a Sikh activist in BC. But Carney has made it clear he wants to defrost the relationship and jumpstart trade talks.
India is the most populous country in the world. It is the fourth largest economy. It is the fastest growing economy, and it's an important geopolitical actor. For us to be able to diversify non-U.S. exports, India has to be a critical part of that puzzle.
Saskatchewan's Premier says he's hopeful a new pipeline to Canada's west coast could be part of the answer.
I would suggest that we as Canadians have a responsibility to provide and displace some of the dirtier forms of energy, some of the more unethical forms of energy.
But questions hang over the two countries' security relationship after one federal official told journalists the violence and repression fueled by the Indian government has stopped. Activists from Canada's Sikh community insist the intimidation continues.
I said it was the 800-pound gorilla. It's the issue that could derail this reset.
Government officials insist there is an ongoing conversation about security right alongside the talk of trade. Carney is beginning his trip here in the country's business capital. On Monday in New Delhi, he'll meet with India's Prime Minister. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Mumbai.
For more on the security conversation as Canada deepens ties with India, I'm joined now by Jody Thomas, former National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Ward Elcock is a former director of CSIS. Jody Thomas, we'll start with you. We went from the Prime Minister of Canada publicly accusing agents of the Indian government of carrying out the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and other threats to Canadian security, to this drastic change of message just 2 years later. What's your assessment of what we've heard from the government?
So to be frank with you, Karina, I think somebody misspoke. There has been a change in the relationship, for sure. There's more dialogue going on at the ministerial level. The NSA from India came to Canada and spoke to our NSIA and ministers. That's a really positive step. But the behavior exhibited by India is largely unchanged. Now, I don't see the intelligence any longer, but there was a duty to warn this week. Then a duty to warn, obviously Ward Elcock can speak more about that than I can, but it's not always state-sponsored, but it's an indicator of ongoing negative behavior by India in Canada. And so to say that the behavior has ceased, I would say is a gross overstatement. And while there hasn't been necessarily another murder, another situation as extreme and egregious as what happened with Mr. Nijjar, the ongoing behavior is largely unchanged.
Ward Elcock, we'll get to the duty to warn in a moment. I do want to ask whether this message from the government contradicts what CSIS, the RCMP, and the NSIA have found.
Well, I can't any more than Jody speak to that because I don't see the intelligence anymore either. I think it's probably true, as Jody said, that Indian behavior has not entirely changed. I am sure they will be far more careful. I don't think they'll have raw officers in Ottawa trying to hire criminals to carry out assassinations anytime in the near future. But I would be surprised if the Indians aren't still using, probably through cutouts and probably from abroad, contacts in Canada to do things. But as Jody said too, the reality is just because there's a duty to warn doesn't mean that it's necessarily state-sponsored. It could indeed be just straightforward criminal activity that probably, given the Hindu nationalism that's really much stronger under Mr. Modi than it has been in the past, it could be just a factor straight Hindu nationalism against Sikhs, who frankly also may be doing things that are probably in India that are probably unacceptable to the Indians. It's not clear that all Sikh activity in Canada, all Sikh terrorist activity in Canada has stopped.
Jody, we've spoken to several ministers since this comment from the senior official came out, Anand and Sangri. They've taken a more nuanced approach to the question, but they haven't contradicted the words of the official. So how should we take Canada's position on this matter now, based on what we've heard in recent days?
Well, I think that the ministers are trying to have a collegial approach. They're trying to ensure that we're not causing offense and we're not making accusations that can't be backed up. But it is the role of security officials to speak truth to power, to the elected officials. And I don't see anything changing in what the RCMP or CSIS have said. And so the role of politicians is quite different than that of officials, the jobs that Ward and I used to do. And our job is to inform them so that they can make policy decisions with the right risk matrix and understanding the risks they're taking in the decisions they're making.
Ward, on the duty to warn that we were just talking about, Maninder Singh from the Sikh Federation of Canada received his fourth duty to warn from the RCMP this week. And Sikh organizations have pointed to several other threats to prominent activists. And I know you said that, obviously there might be things on the other side happening as well, but the RCMP doesn't confirm the origin of a threat in these duties to warn. So do you see a world in which this threat isn't tied to India?
It's possible. It's also possible that it could be tied to contacts from India into the community, into the Hindu community, criminal community in Canada that they have from previous times. So either one is possible, and without knowing the details, it's really impossible for an outsider to do other than just guess, which is not really a very good idea.
Jody, Carney is pushing the idea that Canada can both expand its trade relationship with India while continuing to address security concerns. How doable is that really?
I think it's entirely doable, and I think it's important. I've said repeatedly that national security and economic security are inextricably linked. I think it's critical that we have a strong economy so that we can do things like invest in defense and our national security agencies, and so that we're not seen as weak. I think it is not impossible to have sector by sector risk-based trade agreements with countries like China and India, and they're the two most populous countries on the planet. We are a trading nation. It's critical that we do it, but it has to be done informed by our national security agencies, along with our economic and sectoral departments, in terms of the risk that's being taken versus the opportunity gained, and so that the Prime Minister can make a reasonable decision and plan his strategy.
So it's sort of like an eyes wide open kind of thing. And that brings me to my question to you, Ward. What advice would you give to the federal government to protect Canada's interests while increasing engagement with India?
Well, as Jody said, it's important to go into all of this with eyes wide open. Having said that, I think it's also important to go into discussions with a large number of foreign countries with the realization that they do carry out activities in various parts of the world, and sometimes even in Canada, and that we have to be prepared to take action against specific cases. And that may actually not mean that anything ever comes to the public knowledge. There are ways to deal with some of these things that don't actually require publication of the events. But there are ways to manage the activities of foreign agents in Canada, and the government can do that. It's just got to have the willingness to do it, and sometimes that has been the most difficult issue.
Well, do you worry at all that we don't have our eyes wide open now after everything that's happened? Are there still pockets of naivete within the government or the security services? I assume not, but within the government when it comes to approaching countries like India or China?
I doubt that there's much in the way of naivete in dealings with India. More important to me in some respects at this juncture, in the case of India, is a willingness to actually take the steps that are necessary if indeed we do identify that the Indians are engaged in activities in Canada again, and in similar activities to the ones that are alleged in respect of Mr. Nijjar and others.
Last word to you, Jody. I wonder, though, in terms of taking the right steps, we do feel like this is a very different approach from this government than the previous government under Justin Trudeau. Is it really just about being pragmatic, or is there a risk to that pragmatism in that then we're sacrificing principle?
So, I went to India and I met with the National Security Advisor multiple times over about a 6-month period. And so the Trudeau government also realized we needed to continue conversations with India, that we had to get our diplomats back into India safely, that we had to continue the people-to-people ties that are so important to so many who live here in Canada and are Canadians. And so I don't actually think it's that different. Mr. Modi and Mr. Carney have a different relationship, and there's an ability for Prime Minister Carney to be able to move on a trade deal that is critical to so many sectors in Canada. So I don't think it's different. I think it's an evolution. I think the security agencies continue to have their concerns and will continue to raise the risks for the government to understand and act upon. The RCMP investigation, I believe, is continuing into the murder of Mr. Nijjar, and steps have been taken, like listing the Bishnoi Group as a terrorist entity. And so I don't think it's radically different. I think the relationship has the opportunity to be different, and I think that's positive.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Pleasure.